On the 3rd of May 2022, a statement was released by the South African Department of Correctional Services announcing the death of an inmate. A fire had engulfed his cell where he was serving time at the Mangaung Correctional Center in Bloemfontein. The autopsy report revealed that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The fire had also resulted in extensive burn wounds and charring of the whole body. The media immediately reported on the incident because of the notoriety of this inmate. The investigation surrounding the inmate's death has been shrouded in suspicion and misinformation, as it was originally ruled a suicide. Foul play was also initially ruled out. Later, it was reported that the DNA of the body found in the cell did not match that of the inmates who had purportedly died. But the Correctional Services Department still stood by their initial report about the death of that inmate. As of 2023, South African Police Minister Bheki Cele said, and I quote, "It looks like the DNA doesn't confirm that the person that was found dead there is the same person. So it might be correct to say that somebody is out there. That's why the police are investigating and trying to find that person." A prison warder who wished to remain anonymous also said he didn't believe that the body was that of the reported inmate. A CCTV camera indicated people leaving the prison hurriedly in the early hours of the morning as a fire broke out. The warder thinks that a vagrant's dead body that suffered a blow to the head was moved into the inmate's cell and set alight while the inmate was allowed to escape. On the 11th of June 2022, the warder sent an email to the Deputy Minister of Correctional Services stating, and I quote, "Are you aware that the inmate who allegedly burned to death was supposedly assisted by the Mangaung Correctional Center officials at the prison to escape?" End quote. No action was taken in response to the warder's email. In mid-March 2023, photos began doing the rounds on Twitter of a high-profile celebrity aesthetics doctor, who shall not be named, and a man resembling the inmate who had reportedly died out grocery shopping. Although he was confirmed to be dead by the Department of Correctional Services, many on Twitter believed the man in the pictures to be the notorious inmate with the celebrity aesthetics doctor. This is because after the announcement of his death, the celebrity aesthetics doctor approached the Pretoria High Court and requested the body be returned to her, as she was his wife by customary law. In South Africa, a customary marriage is one that is in accordance with systems of indigenous African law. The doctor and the inmate allegedly met in 2006 while she was a student at Wits University. They rekindled their romance while he was in prison almost a decade later. The images circulating on Twitter sparked controversy, as it was further evidence that the inmate who was in prison serving time for murder and R-word was alive and well beyond the prison walls. In 2011, life was probably coming together for Nomfundo Tyulu. She was a beautiful woman in her 20s with a job as a car salesperson and model. She lived in the northern suburbs of Johannesburg and was working hard to make her dreams come true. At this time, there was also a potential romantic interest in her life. Nomfundo sold cars to many clients, but in January 2011, she felt a connection with one of her clients when they met at her workplace, a BMW car dealership. He was living in Durban at the time, and after their initial meeting at her job, they began texting and calling each other daily. Nomfundo Tyulu's friendship with this client bloomed as they bonded over their ambitions. He had told her that he was the owner of an events hosting business. Things in their friendship shifted when he invited her on a trip to Cape Town to meet a potential business investor. The ever hard-working Nomfundo had found a new job and had a few days to spare before she started working. He booked a ticket for her to fly to him in Durban, and then they flew together to Cape Town. In Cape Town, the pair initially stayed at a hotel called the One and Only before moving to a bed and breakfast called Ocean Breeze Villa Retreat at Sunset Beach near Milnerton. It sounds like the Cape Town trip was meant for business, but perhaps the trip was meant for pleasure as well. Sunset Beach is known for its magnificent views of Table Mountain and, of course, its sunsets. Many retirees live there, but it is also a popular tourist hotspot. In a situation like this, mixed signals can easily arise between two people, especially because they were sharing a room at the guest house. Nomfundo wanted something more with her former client, but he had a different idea and said that he was not pursuing a romantic relationship with her. A revelation about a former girlfriend of Nomfundo's former client led to an argument at the Ocean Breeze guest house. Tension also loomed in their room because the meeting with the potential investor and Nomfundo's former clients did not go very well that day. After the argument, however, they both went to bed. At 7 a.m. the next morning, Nomfundo's former clients checked out of the guest house without Nomfundo. As he was leaving, he told reception that she was still asleep and should not be disturbed until 2 p.m. He also requested a ride from the guest house owner to Cape Town city centre before flying back to Durban. During Nomfundo's Cape Town trip with her former client, a story about a serial R word in South Africa began dominating the press. According to the police who were actively investigating, the serial R word was known to target models with promises of lucrative modeling jobs. Shortly after her former client flew back to Durban, Nomfundo was reported missing, and a missing persons report was also filed. In 2011, the modeling and entertainment industry in South Africa was on high alert as reports of the Facebook R word gained momentum all over the media. The suspect was known to have 13 different aliases, and his MO was to lure women who were interested in jobs such as modeling, acting, or promotional work, and he would R-word and rob them at knife point. He had victims in 3 cities across South Africa, that is Durban, Cape Town, and Johannesburg, and the police were receiving calls daily from people who had been approached, targeted, or scammed by him. The Facebook R-word pretended to be the CEO of a company and claimed to represent various television networks such as MTV. In 2009, he almost got away with a scam where he posed as a scout for an African version of America's Next Top Model. For this, he was actually arrested, but managed to get released on bail. In 2011, he pretended to be a representative of the ANC, or the African National Congress, planning a birthday party for former president of the ANC, Nelson Mandela. He hired 10 women to do promotional work for this event, and he transported them on a luxury bus from Durban to Johannesburg. They stayed at a 5-star hotel, and they were offered 2,000 rand, about $100 for 2.5 days' work. He managed to take their laptops and cell phones, and the women later realized that they had been robbed of their belongings when the hotel told them there was no booking under the so-called ANC representative's name. He had, of course, disappeared at this point. Another aspiring model from Johannesburg traveled to Durban with him for an assignment. He ended up tying her up in her hotel room and cut her face and R-worded her before leaving with her valuable belongings. This predatory man was even known to go to university campuses to prey on unsuspecting students. A 17-year-old victim was held at gunpoint by him with 2 other students after he had promised them waitressing jobs at a nightclub in Sandton, Johannesburg. These stories don't even scratch the surface of the myriad of crimes that he committed. By late 2011, he was wanted in connection with over 30 different cases involving fraud, theft, and R-word. He wasn't silent about his crimes either, and was known to taunt police via Facebook and challenge them to catch him while he continued to arrogantly live a lavish lifestyle. At this stage, the police had identified the Facebook R-word, and Lieutenant Colonel Anton Boyson, who was then the head of the psychologically motivated crime units, said, and I quote, "It seems he is not afraid. His modus operandi is so complex that we assume he is of reasonable intellect, but the cameras don't bother him." End quote. As a nationwide search commenced for the Facebook R-word, Lieutenant Colonel Anton Boyson even had a 17-minute phone call with him before he was apprehended. It was actually the Facebook R-word who made the call to Boyson. During this call, the Facebook R-word threatened to end his own life. 4 days before his actual arrest in Alberton, Gauteng, the Facebook R-word posted to his Facebook account where he denied harming or killing models but admitted to stealing from them. When he was eventually apprehended, the media identified the Facebook R-word as a man named Thabo Bester. Thabo Bester was born in Alberton, south of Johannesburg, in 1987 or 1989. He was born to a 16-year-old Macy Makakula, and it is said that he was fathered by a local shopkeeper. It appears that he was raised by his grandmother and grandfather on a farm in Gauteng, and he says he had never met his mother. According to Bester, his grandmother was an alcoholic, and the conditions under which they lived were terrible. After his grandmother passed on, Bester says he lived with friends in a squatter camp. Bester says that a man who promised to look after him locked him up in his house for days and essayed him. This man was allegedly a friend of his grandmother's. Throughout his upbringing, Thabo says that he resorted to crime. He says, and I quote, "I resorted to crime to support myself. It is either you die or make a plan." End quote. There are others, however, who dispute the details of his upbringing. Bester grew up in a community called Eikenhof in the south of Johannesburg. Eikenhof is 15 kilometers from the city center, Johannesburg. It's in the countryside, and most of the homes are small holdings or plots. A quote from an Eikenhof website says, "It is the scene of beautiful grasslands interspersed with graceful rocky outcrops that offer peace, a feeling of getting away from it all, and hours of hiking or mountain biking." End quote. A man who knew Thabo Bester as a child said, and I quote, "He has painted a scenario of himself as the victim and that he grew up underprivileged. It's a lie. He grew up privileged like the rest of us." End quote. Community members basically disputed his claims of abuse and the hard knock life he had described. It appears that from a young age, Bester was known to have a habit of lying and stealing. As one community member from his childhood described being confronted with the fact that Bester had stolen a large sum of money from her. Another story alleges that he stole a bottle of coins from a family where his grandmother and grandfather were living. A man who grew up with Thabo denies that his grandmother was an alcoholic. He said, and I quote, "They did not drink a lot. They would drink on weekends like everyone else, never in the week." End quote. There are other families in the community who took pity on Thabo Bester as a child, but it was only a matter of time before they grew tired of helping him. Perhaps he was a child in need, especially without the foundation of a two-parent household, but it sounds like his version of his upbringing differs greatly from those who knew him. In 2009, Thabo was convicted of fraud and sentenced to jail, and this is where he alleges he was gang R-word. He would have been 20 at this time. Of the crime that he committed, he said that some guys asked him to cash fraudulent checks and run other errands for which he was paid. This may have been the first time he had a run-in with the law, but it certainly wasn't the last. He did not serve the entire sentence and was eventually paroled. A stint in jail clearly did not stifle his appetite for committing crimes as he turned from fraud to something more sinister, targeting and R-wording women. High on getting away with R-word and robbery, it would only be a matter of time before he almost got away with murder. And this is where Nomfundo Tyulu comes back into the picture. Nomfundo's trip to Cape Town turned fatal on the night that she argued with Thabo Bester, her former client. As it previously stated, the argument was about a former girlfriend of Thabo's. Some articles state that the two went to sleep after the argument. In his own words, Thabo said, and I quote, "That night I wanted to scare her, so I took a knife and we got into a struggle. As she held my arm, my hand slipped and I stabbed her. I tried to stop the bleeding, but there was too much blood. She did not say anything." End quote. Bester had stabbed Nomfundo Tyulu in the lung that night in 2011. He then proceeded to rob her because he said by that point he knew the investor that Nomfundo had accompanied him to wasn't interested in investing in his business. Thabo had said of Tyulu's murder, and I quote, "I wasn't thinking straight. I knew I was wanted for rape and the police would not believe it was an accident." End quote. After Nomfundo Tyulu was reported missing, it was the guest house owner who discovered her lifeless body. As police were already investigating Thabo Bester, they came to a conclusion when they learned of Nomfundo Tyulu's death. Lieutenant Colonel Anton Boyson said, and I quote, "We know that in the case of the Cape Town girl who was murdered, they went to the one and only hotel at some stage." End quote. Boyson then said he was almost certain that the one who had killed Nomfundo Tyulu was the Facebook R-word. In 2012, Thabo Bester was convicted of R-wording two models in Durban. That was followed by a conviction for robbery and the murder of Nomfundo Tyulu. But since the news of his alleged escape in 2022, South African citizens have been on edge. Singabakho Nxumalo, a spokesperson for the Department of Correctional Services, said that they currently stand by their initial statement, which stated that Thabo Bester had burned to death. Nxumalo said, "Until such time that new information is brought to us, until such time that the investigating team is done with its report and is presented to us, and then if there are findings telling us something on the contrary, we've committed ourselves that we will then make the report public." Meanwhile, since the reports of Thabo Bester sightings, many more women have come forward with information about recent encounters with him, where he has continued to misrepresent himself and use different aliases. Following reports that Thabo Bester is still alive, Bheki Cele, the South African police minister, has confirmed that an investigation is underway. About 10 years after his arrest, a calculating predator appears to be roaming the streets once again. Lieutenant Colonel Anton Boyson has previously described Thabo Bester as cold and calm. And as police were closing in on arresting Bester in 2011, Boyson also said, and I quote, To me, it seems his violent manner is getting progressively worse. Serial offenders are in general psychopaths, so that makes them very dangerous. End quote. This concludes episode 1 of South African True Crime Stories.